All right, hello, welcome. So this is just a brief video to kind of highlight and emphasize some of that pre-lab introductory material content, the anatomical terminology for the most part, and as well as just kind of a few prefacing comments about how to be successful in the anatomy lab for this spring term. And so I'm just going to use the document that will be posted for you as well in your Blackboard to kind of follow along that to help, as I said, just guide a few and emphasize a few key ideas and points about the material. Not going to go through line by line and term by term or anything like that. You guys can read, and for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. So, all right. So that said, I'm just going to scroll down a little bit here, and this just the table of contents. So this just breaks up the labs. Of course, we're condensing our term for the spring term here. So these are, for the most part, combined in different ways, but that's in your lab schedule. So I'm not going to go into that. A bit about the lab instructions, just a few things to point out that I would normally do right in the lab, but again, because we're doing this kind of blended version, some of this is online, I'm going to start here instead. And so just to note that in the lab, in the in-person part, we'll be using models of the human skeleton. Some of those are real, some of them are plastic models. Some of them are very old and have been around for a long time, and some are brand new. So we have kind of a mix of variety there of different models. We also have plastic models for the muscles, to learn all the different muscles of the human body, of the skeletal, musculoskeletal system. And then beyond that, also some models of the other systems as well, but also we do have some technology for you to be able to use in the lab. So iPads that have some pretty cool apps on them that will be also very helpful for you, especially when it comes to kind of looking at the layers of the muscles and so on, and learning the pronouncement, or how to pronounce the terms and that kind of thing. So a lot of different options there for you in the lab, and again, that's why it'll be important to be there. And why I will emphasize that you try to have the labeling from your lab manual already completed, or at least mostly completed, so that you're not spending time on that in lab, but rather using all these other tools and so on that you have available only in the lab. The lab manual you can access anytime, right? So that gets to the next point here, that try to have that labeling for that next section as completed as possible, so that you can spend your time on things that are more specific to the lab. But of course, any questions or problems you have, you can bring to the lab as well. So. There are, just to point out, there are models in the library that you can't take out of the library, but you can access the breakout rooms there, and you can bring them in, book them up for like 4 hours. And I do suggest you do this. I also recommend that you try to connect with a few other students in your class and work together to learn and to sort of teach each other, as that's going to be a way more effective way of learning the material than just sitting there and trying to memorize it all by yourself. When you're teaching somebody else, that helps to reinforce the material a lot stronger. So just one of my suggestions that I'm going to make. There are some links in this document as well, that some of which are just Red Deer Polytechnic. The library has some anatomy and physiology websites and so on that you can access here. Now this McKinley website or link here is assuming you have a new textbook and you have the product key for that textbook, then you will have access to, you should have access to online, some of the online features. And so there's a link here to take you to that, where you'd have to sign in and then enter the product key. So if you're using a used textbook, then you probably won't have that. This is just additional resources. It's not necessary to have access to be successful in the lab or the class, but just additional stuff there for you. And then same thing with the A&P revealed. I don't believe you'll be able to access without the key. That said, you can try it. I have automatic access to it, so I can't see what happens to somebody who isn't already signed in if they click on this link. So it may work for you, but I think you need to have the product key from a new textbook for this link as well. Okay, so just a few resources there for you. So when it comes to the terminology here, so anatomical terminology, this, as I mentioned in my introductory video, is knowledge of this will help you to be able to kind of wrap your head around and to be more successful in learning the rest of the content, because you'll have like some reference. A lot of the discussion of markings of bones is around, uses this terminology, as well as like location of muscles, how they move, all that kind of stuff comes back to this terminology. And so if you already have this knowledge in your head, it will make learning the rest of the stuff so much easier. So just some basics here. I'm not going to go through everything, as I said, line by line. I'm just going to kind of highlight a few things. So just note, to begin with, a lot of the pictures that you see in your textbooks are sections of the body, or of parts of the body, of organs. So it is helpful to know the names of the sections, so you know exactly what you're looking at. What is the view that you're looking at, right? So we have three primary or cardinal planes that the body or body parts could be divided into, and that this diagram right here just shows you those three planes. Okay, so they're listed below here. The sagittal plane, so right here, that's this plane right here that divides the body or the body part in left and right halves, if it's the mid-sagittal plane. Could be a sagittal that is in a different part of the body, it still divides it in left and right, but it just wouldn't be perfect halves. Okay, so left and right sections, as it shows in this diagram. Then we also have the coronal or frontal plane. Okay, so that is this plane right here that is separating or dividing the body in anterior and posterior, or front and back portions. Okay. And then finally the transverse, or also known as the horizontal sometimes plane. And that's this one here that divides the body or body part in upper or lower, superior or inferior portions. Okay. Some of these arrows here are also for directional terms that I'll get to in a second here. Knowing the axes are going to be primarily important when it comes to the muscles and learning the movement or the actions of the muscles. And so knowing if you want to sort of visualize these axes as like pins or rods that are going through the joints, and around which the body parts are being moved by those muscles. Okay, so we have, again, as with the cardinal or primary planes, we have corresponding axes that are that correspond. Each one corresponds with one of the planes, and so these are the sagittal axes. Sorry, brain fart there. This is also known sometimes as the anterior-posterior axes, so the AP axis. And that is that rod that sort of projects from the front to the back of the body, essentially. Okay. The frontal, or sometimes known as the horizontal axes, is the rod or the axes that would project from the right to the left or the left to the right side of the body. So through the hips, essentially, from the side to the side. Okay. And again, these could also be found if we wanted to kind of divide the body up into limbs or so on. We could also take a limb and it would be the same thing. So for example, if it was the arm we were talking about, it would be from the right side, from the outer part of the arm to the elbow to the inner part of the arm, projecting towards the body. So, okay. And then vertical is or sometimes known as longitudinal. This is the rod or the pin that would go from straight through the head, right through the body, from the top to the bottom, essentially. And so this is axes that rotation around, which would take place in a horizontal plane. So if you were spinning in like a pirouette, you'd be moving around that vertical axis. So one thing I should point out is that all of the terms of direction and all of these planes and axes and so on, and all the description we have of the human body, it always comes back to the standard anatomical position, which is what this figure is in this diagram here, with the palms, arms by the sides, palms facing forward, feet roughly shoulder width apart, body erect, and so on. So no matter what this means is that when we refer to some part of the body in reference to another, we're always referring to it in reference to the standard anatomical position, right? So in other words, it doesn't matter what position we see an arm in, either in real life or in a picture, the biceps is always going to be proximal to the forearm or the hand. So the head is always going to be superior to the shoulders. Okay, so it doesn't matter if somebody's in a handstand or something like that. The terms of direction and so on always come back to the standard anatomical position. Okay. So speaking of terms of direction, these are listed here. They're all pretty straightforward. Again, I'm not going to run through these. You're perfectly capable of reading. Just make sure you do. As I said, they're all pretty descriptive, so I will let you kind of go through that on your own. A couple of notes here about contra and ipsilateral. Just read that again. Make sure you understand that, so that when you're referring to or reading something about that and it uses that term, you know what that means. So as we're going through the lab, there's different ways of dividing up the body, but one of the ways is, when it comes to the skeletal system at least, is to divide it in appendicular and axial. And so we're going to be using that approach. We're going to start off with the appendicular skeleton, and then we'll get to the axial skeleton after that. So just note that the appendicular is essentially the limbs and the girdles that are attached to the rest of the body, the axial skeleton. And so that's the upper and the lower limbs, along with the pectoral girdle and the pelvic girdle. So essentially that's the appendicular skeleton. Markings here, again, pretty straightforward. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. Just a couple of things to note. That articular surfaces, as it says, are those surfaces of the bones, typically the ends of the bones, that are in contact with the bone adjacent to it. Right? So the condyles we see at the ends, typically at the ends of the bones. Those are smooth surfaces. Facets, fossa, head. Fossa, notes, can be an articular surface, or as you'll see, a non-articular surface. So these are the kind of the main terms that we would use in conjunction, sometimes with a specific term as well to a specific marking. Just note if you know what a condyle is already, then that helps you to be able to identify, the medial or lateral condyle of the femur or what have you, right? So then you can recognize that as being a condyle. Will help you with learning that stuff. So, moving into the next section here, the non-articular surfaces. So this is where typically they're attachment sites for the muscles and ligaments. And so they'll be typically kind of rougher, bumpier projections of some sort throughout the different bones. And there's a number of terms here that you'll need to know, but a lot of them are pretty descriptive. So a crest, for example, a line, a notch, these are all pretty self-descriptive and does help with, again, knowing that. Now, there are some that are pretty similar in terms of what they're describing. So you do have to, there is a certain amount of memorization to this, but still knowing some of that does help you when it comes to identifying the different markings on the bones. Okay, so and a couple of these are very specific to just one single marking or one on each side of the body, like the hamulus, which is found in the palm of the hand, trochanters. Okay, so there's a couple here that are specific to that. I just want to point out this one here, epicondyle. So if you recall in the articular surfaces, there's the condyle. Epi means adjacent to or beside, so pretty much all condyles are smooth because they're articular surfaces. But then right next to them, there's usually going to be some kind of ligament or tendon that is attached to that part of the bone, and it'll be a rough texture kind of surface, and it'll be right next to that condyle. So epi means adjacent to or next to or whatever. So that'll be something that will help you to learn those markings on some of the bones. So okay, a little bit of similarity here in tubercle and tuberosity. So that's just it's something that it'll be one of those ones where you'll just have to kind of remember and memorize the difference between the terms. So. And then there's also, of course, there's arteries and veins and nerves and other structures that kind of run through different parts of the bones. And so then we need to have these grooves or these holes for those structures. So again, pretty straightforward. Foramen, get to know foramen. There's a lot of them in the skull especially. So those are just simply small holes. A fissure is more like as it says, a cleft, right? So fissure, sulcus are pretty similar kinds of things. So they're usually just, in a couple cases, they're used interchangeably, but not always. So it's just how anatomy goes. So, okay. I'm not going to get into the content of Lab 1 there, the upper appendicular skeleton. That'll be a separate video that'll be posted for you. So that's just a little bit of a preface stuff for you to help you with setting up for success for this lab. So there is this document posted as well as a Blackboard quiz that I would like for you to all go through prior to our first lab. So good luck with that, and if you have any questions, just send me that email. Again, as I mentioned in my announcement and in my video, please make sure you're using my RDP email to connect with me. So I've got that in the introductory stuff in Blackboard. So if you need to get a hold of me, that's the best way to do so. Okay, that's all for today. Thanks, guys.